Imagine being handed a sentient alien being as a war prize labeled fragile. Handle with diplomatic care. That's exactly what happened to Lieutenant Darren Holt when a reinforced polymer crate arrived at Outpost 7. Inside wasn't a weapon or technology. It was a living, breathing person designated as War Compensation Asset Class 4. This is the story of how a military reward became something neither of them. The reinforced polymer crate sat on the delivery bay floor, its surface gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. A single sticker stood out against the gray material. Fragile. Handle with diplomatic care printed in crisp military font. The words felt like some kind of sick joke considering what the courier was telling him. The man wore the same uniform as Darren, but moved with the stiff precision of someone who'd never actually been shot at. Asset requires immediate registration, the courier said, handing over a datapad. Sign here acknowledging receipt of War Compensation Asset Class 4. He gestured to the crate like he was pointing out faulty equipment. You've been designated primary handler. Darren stared at the container. The design featured reinforced locks and climate control panels instead of handles. Someone had engineered this thing to prioritize security over basic dignity. You sent me a fridge, he said, the words coming out flat. His war fatigue had reached the point where sarcasm was the only defense mechanism left. The courier didn't smile. Regulations require the asset be contained during transport. Standard procedure for sentient prizes. The term landed with clinical coldness. Sentient prizes. Darren had seen the paperwork before. Compensation assets ranked alongside salvaged tech and territorial concessions. The military bureaucracy had found a way to process living beings through the same systems they used for ammunition and rations. He scanned the documentation on the pad. 3 pages of handling procedures, dietary requirements, and behavioral protocols. The word "it" appeared 47 times. Not she, not person, not even prisoner. Just asset. Property. His signature would make him complicit in treating a conscious being like equipment. The courier waited, impatience tightening his posture. We're on schedule, Lieutenant. Authorization, or I need to contact command. The implication hung between them. Refusal meant disciplinary action. Maybe reassignment to some frontline hellhole. Darren took the stylus. His hand hesitated over the signature line. For a moment he considered what he was endorsing. A system that distributed people as rewards, that turned empathy into a liability. Then he scrawled his name. The electronic signature glowed blue on the screen. Asset is your responsibility now, the courier said, already turning toward his transport. Good luck, handler. The outer airlock sealed behind him, leaving Darren alone with the crate. The hum of the climate control system filled the sudden silence. He approached slowly, noting the small viewport at eye level. Dark inside. He tapped the activation panel. The interior lights flickered on, revealing a woman with sharp features and eyes that held no fear. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her knees. The posture suggested dignity, not submission. Her gaze met his through the polymer glass, and in that moment, the paperwork and classifications meant nothing. Darren reached for the manual release. The locks disengaged with a series of heavy clicks. He knew he'd just accepted ownership of another living being, but curiosity had already overridden duty. The airlock sealed behind them both, trapping them in this new reality. She stepped from the crate without assistance, her movements precise and economical. Her eyes swept the room before locking onto him. Not a glance. Assessment. You're the human? She asked. The words held no curiosity, only challenge. Darren had prepared for tears, for pleading, for the kind of terrified compliance the military manuals described. Instead, he got this. A woman who looked at an armed soldier in an isolated outpost like he might be the one at disadvantage. He matched her tone. Depends. You the new coffee machine? Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something shifted in the air between them. I do not brew beverages, she said, but I could recalibrate your systems to produce something drinkable. Your current settings suggest you enjoy battery acid. The exchange felt like walking a wire. Suspicion on one side, something dangerously close to flirtation on the other. Her posture never relaxed. She kept her back to the wall, scanning the room's sightlines and exits. A trained soldier's behavior, not a captive's. She watched him process this. 3 conditions, she said. Her voice stayed level, but her eyes narrowed slightly. 1. I will not attempt escape. 2. I will not kill you. A pause. 3. You will not use the word master. Darren raised an eyebrow. That's it? No demands for luxury accommodations? No request for transport home? Home is a crater, she said. The words held no self-pity. Your command structure believes they've given you a slave. I am informing you that you have a roommate with specific boundaries. The offer hung between them. Not submission, but negotiation. Not obedience, but terms. Darren considered the paperwork waiting on his terminal. The asset management protocols, the behavioral monitoring requirements. All of it designed for control. He looked at the woman standing before him. Her hands relaxed at her sides but ready. Her stance balanced for movement in any direction. The military had sent him a prize, but they delivered a partner in whatever this would become. Deal, he said. The single word changed everything. The dynamic shifted from captor-captive to something more complicated. More dangerous, more interesting. She nodded once. I am Liara. Darren. They stood in the humming silence of the outpost. The sterile white lights reflected off polished surfaces, but the space felt different now. Less empty. The banter had established a fragile parity, a recognition that they would either break each other or build something neither expected. Humor became their first shared language. A way to test boundaries without confrontation, to acknowledge the absurdity of their situation without surrendering to it. When Darren gestured toward the small kitchen area, his movement careful and deliberate, Liara's response held the ghost of actual amusement. Show me this coffee machine I'm being compared to, she said. Perhaps I can improve its programming. And yours. They moved through the outpost together, two people performing a delicate dance of observation and response. Every glance carried weight. Every comment held layers. The airlock was sealed behind them, but new doors were opening in the space between words. The systems hummed around them, recording everything and understanding nothing. Expected. Outpost 7 became a laboratory for forced companionship. Darren maintained his routines like they were lifelines. Morning coffee, system diagnostics, inventory checks. Liara watched from whatever corner she'd claimed that day, her expression hovering between amusement and pity. She never commented unless he did something particularly human. When he burned his toast, she merely observed, "Your species' tolerance for carbonized carbohydrates is remarkable." Her critique of human cuisine became more direct when she synthesized her own meals. A neon green nutrient paste appeared in the food dispenser one morning, sharing space with his standard rations. It smelled like rain on hot metal. She ate it with deliberate precision while he choked down reconstituted eggs. Nutritionally superior, she said, pushing a bowl toward him. And it won't dissolve your stomach lining. Their shared space became a battleground of escalating pranks. Darren returned from patrol to find the environmental controls reprogrammed. The air hung thick with the humid sweetness of some alien jungle. Condensation beaded on every surface. Optimal conditions for my biology, Liara explained without looking up from her work. Your epidermis will adapt, probably. He retaliated that evening. The shower sensors triggered a tinny rendition of, "Oh." Susanna when she stepped under the water. Her shriek echoed through the ventilation system. She emerged dripping, her usually impeccable composure cracked. What is this auditory assault? Cultural education, Darren said, leaning against the doorway. Human folk music. Helps with hygiene. They maintained the joking posture like armor. The humor masked the careful observations happening beneath. Darren noticed how she always positioned herself to watch both him and the exits. How her hands never quite relaxed. How she cataloged every tool, every weapon, every potential vulnerability in their sterile home. Liara watched him too. The way he checked the perimeter scans twice each night. How he always left the better tools on her side of the workbench. The particular cadence of his footsteps when he approached her doorway without entering. Small gestures became their currency. He left a calibrated plasma wrench beside her morning nutrient paste. She reprogrammed the coffee maker to stop producing what she called toxic sludge. He found the temperature perfect the next morning. They never acknowledged these exchanges directly. The silence between them changed. What began as hostile quiet became something more complicated, a space filled with unspoken negotiations and wary curiosity. They developed rhythms without discussing them. Mornings in the galley, evenings repairing equipment, nights maintaining separate watches for threats that never came. Their defiance began to feel like care. When Darren adjusted the environmental controls to maintain her preferred humidity near her quarters, he framed it as system maintenance. When Liara double-checked his pressure suit seals before external repairs, she called it preventing unnecessary mess. They accepted each other's lies without comment. The outpost never felt less like a military installation. Their coexistence forged something that looked nothing like the handler-asset relationship Command had envisioned. They moved through the space like partners in some strange dance, each learning the other's steps through observation rather than instruction. The hum of machinery became the soundtrack to their unspoken conversations. The way Darren left the security scans visible on her terminal screen. The manner in which Liara stopped positioning herself for combat every time he entered a room. These tiny adjustments spoke louder than any declaration could. They built a functional partnership on the foundation of sarcasm and small kindnesses. The sterile white corridors of Outpost 7 began to feel less like a prison and more like neutral territory. A place where two people from opposite sides of a war could rewrite the rules of engagement without ever discussing the terms. The toaster developed a personality disorder. It began subtly, a slice slightly darker than requested, then patterns of uneven browning that looked almost intentional. By the third day, it was producing charcoal briquettes with theatrical flair, complete with a little puff of smoke and the distinct smell of regret. Darren stared at the latest offering, blackened beyond recognition. Maybe it's protesting working conditions, he suggested. Liara approached the machine like a bomb technician assessing an unstable device. "If you incinerate another carbohydrate," she told the toaster, "I swear on the bones of my ancestors I will repurpose your heating elements for scrap." Her tone held genuine menace. The toaster, perhaps sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, remained silent. She ran diagnostics while Darren watched, her fingers moving across the control panel with practiced efficiency. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Its quantum regulation systems are folding in on themselves, creating miniature event horizons within the heating coils." She looked up, seeing not a malfunctioning appliance but a complex physics problem. "It's experiencing thermal entropy at an accelerated rate." Darren leaned against the counter. "Should we call an exorcist or just hit it with a wrench?" Liara didn't smile. "Your species' solution to everything involves percussive maintenance." She continued her examination, her focus absolute. The toaster had become her personal challenge, a puzzle to solve rather than a machine to replace. The breakthrough came when the device produced not burnt toast, but something entirely unexpected. The bread emerged perfectly golden, but marked with a precise pattern of darker lines that formed a complex star chart. Darren held it up to the light. "Since when does our toaster know celestial navigation?" Liara took the slice, her expression shifting from technician to scientist. "These coordinates don't match any known human or Varley system. They're theoretical or perhaps prophetic." She studied the pattern, her brow furrowed. "The machine isn't malfunctioning. It's communicating." Their attempts to fix it became a joint project. Darren handled the hardware, recalibrating sensors, replacing aging components. Liara worked on the software, her fingers flying across datapads as she decoded the toaster's increasingly erratic behavior. They passed tools back and forth without speaking, their movements synchronized through weeks of practiced coexistence. The naming debate lasted 2 days. Darren favored Class 4 Threat, playing on her original designation. Liara preferred Pastry Provocateur, claiming it captured the machine's rebellious spirit. They settled on Toast because sometimes simplicity worked best. The repair became their neutral ground. Not human technology, not alien science, but a shared problem that required both their skills. Darren learned about quantum toast alignment. Liara learned that sometimes hitting something with a wrench actually helped. They worked side by side, their shoulders almost touching as they peered into the machine's interior. The final test came 3 days later. Darren inserted a fresh slice of bread. Liara initiated the sequence. The toaster hummed, its lights cycling through colors neither of them had seen before. The smell of perfectly toasted bread filled the galley. The slice emerged golden brown, evenly heated, without a single star chart or burnt edge. Darren spread butter on it, the surface accepting the spread without crumbling. He offered half to Liara. She took it, her usual reserve momentarily abandoned. They ate standing there by the counter, the toaster cooling between them. The bread tasted like victory, not because they'd fixed an appliance, but because they'd fixed it together. The machine's rebellion had given them common purpose, a project that belonged to neither human nor Varley, but to both. Toast returned to its duties, now producing perfect slices every time. But occasionally, when both of them were working late, it would produce one piece marked with a small, perfect star pattern right in the center. They never mentioned these occurrences, just shared the slice in silent acknowledgement that some chaos was worth preserving. The moon's desert stretched out in waves of gray dust, an ocean of nothing that Darren scanned for salvageable debris. His sensors picked up faint metal readings, but Liara spotted it first. Her hand rose, pointing toward a glint of silver half buried in a dune. "There," she said, her voice losing its usual precision. They approached slowly, boots sinking into the fine powder. The wreckage wasn't much. Twisted alloy plating, shattered viewports, the skeletal remains of what might have been seats. Standard evacuation pod design, but not human. Darren began his usual assessment, mentally cataloging components worth recovering. Heat shield fragments could be repurposed. The guidance system might still have intact crystals. Liara stopped moving. Her breathing changed. She knelt beside a large section of hull, her fingers tracing a symbol almost erased by sandblasting, a spiral contained within a star. Her hand trembled slightly against the metal. "This was a Varley refugee transport," she whispered. The words barely carried over the wind. "My cousin was on one just like it." She didn't look at him. Her attention stayed fixed on the emblem, as if reading a story in the scored metal. Darren's scanner clicked off. The practical part of his mind, the soldier who knew how to prioritize missions, went quiet. He watched her instead. The way her shoulders curved forward, the careful control in her breathing. This wasn't debris anymore. This was a grave. He didn't offer empty comfort or ask useless questions. He just stood there, giving her space and silence. The desert wind pulled at their suits, whipping dust across the wreckage. It tasted like iron and regret. Liara's fingers remained on the symbol. "They told us the evacuation was successful, that all pods reached safe territory." Her voice held no anger, just the flat tone of someone realizing they've been lied to for years. "She carried our family's memory crystals, said she'd safeguard them until we reunited." Darren looked at the shattered pod with new eyes. Not components, not salvage, a final resting place for someone's cousin, someone's memories, someone's hope. The military reports called these enemy casualties. The paperwork used terms like neutralized threats and acceptable losses. None of it mentioned cousins or memory crystals. He finally moved, crouching beside her but not touching, not encroaching. "We can leave it undisturbed," he said. The offer felt inadequate, but it was all he had. Liara looked at him then. Really looked. Her eyes held none of their usual sharp assessment. Just raw grief, thinly veiled. "She would have liked you," she said. The statement bridged species, war, loss. It acknowledged that somewhere beyond uniforms and designations, people could recognize worth in each other. They didn't mark the site. Didn't take anything. Just stood together as the wind slowly reclaimed the wreckage grain by grain. The desert would swallow this story eventually, but they would carry it with them. The walk back to the transport felt longer. The usual banter didn't come. Their suits clicked together at the airlock, but the silence between them held more meaning than words could have. Darren initiated the decontamination cycle without his usual commentary about bureaucracy. Back inside the outpost, the sterile air felt different. The humming systems, the polished floors, all of it seemed less substantial compared to what they'd left in the dunes. Liara removed her helmet slowly, her movements deliberate. She didn't retreat to her quarters immediately. "They told us humans didn't understand loss," she said, standing by the viewport that showed nothing but endless gray, "that you valued territory over lives." Darren didn't defend his species, didn't cite exceptions or quote statistics. He just said, "Some of us do." She nodded once, a small movement that acknowledged everything they weren't saying. Then she moved toward the galley, not fleeing but transitioning. The moment passed, but the desert had changed them. The wreckage remained where they'd found it, but its weight traveled back with them, settling into the spaces between their words and silences. Their dynamic had shifted from negotiated coexistence to something quieter, more fragile, more real. The outpost's lights hummed the same tune, but the notes landed differently now. The transmission alert cut through the outpost's usual hum with bureaucratic urgency. Commander Riven's face appeared on the main screen, his features compressed by the low bandwidth connection. Static lines danced across his uniform insignia. "Lieutenant Holt," he began, skipping pleasantries. "Your weekly containment report shows anomalies." His tone suggested Darren had misclassified weapons instead of recording a person's daily activities. Darren leaned back in his chair, adopting the relaxed posture that annoyed superiors. "Anomalies, sir? Probably just the coffee machine acting up again. It's developed existential dread." He kept his voice light, but his shoulders tightened. Liara stood near the doorway, pretending to calibrate a sensor array. Her back was to the screen, but Darren saw her hands go still. Riven's expression didn't change. The asset's behavior logs indicate unauthorized system access. Multiple environmental control overrides. Also, your nutritional reports show cross-species food sharing. He made it sound like a contamination risk. "These are protocol violations, Lieutenant." "Pretty sure sharing toast isn't a court-martial offense," Darren said. "Besides, her nutrient paste improves morale. Tastes like victory and crushed dreams, but in a good way." He tried to catch Liara's eye, but she kept her focus on the panel. "That's not for you to decide," Riven said. The words landed like a door slamming. "The asset represents a significant investment. Its behavior requires monitoring, not encouragement." He glanced at something off-screen. "Has it attempted any communication with external forces? Displayed hostile tendencies?" Liara set down her tools. The movement was quiet but deliberate. She walked out of the room without looking at either of them. Her exit a silent protest against being discussed in third person. The doorway swallowed her, leaving empty space where she'd been standing. Riven's eyes followed her departure. "You're getting too comfortable, Holt. Remember what she is." The phrase hung in the air. What she is, not who. A thing, an asset, a potential threat. The military's perspective reduced months of careful coexistence to a security risk assessment. Darren watched the empty doorway. He thought about Liara tracing that symbol in the desert sand. The way she'd said, "She would have liked you," with raw honesty. The shared silence over burnt toast and star charts. None of it fit the forms or protocols. He turned back to the screen. The defiance felt physical, a weight in his chest. "She's a person," he said. The words came out flat, final. No humor left to soften them. Riven's eyebrows rose slightly. "She's compensation for 17 lost human lives. Never forget that." The screen flickered, his image distorting for a moment. "Your next report better show proper containment procedures. Or we'll send someone who remembers how to follow orders." The transmission cut abruptly. The screen went dark, reflecting Darren's own face back at him. The silence felt heavier than before. No hum of systems, no quiet movement from the other room. Just his own breathing and the echo of what he'd just done. He'd drawn a line. Not with weapons or protests, but with 3 words. "She's a person." The military would call it insubordination. The paperwork would label it emotional compromise. Darren stared at his reflection in the dark screen. He'd chosen her humanity over his duty, and the choice felt less like rebellion and more like finally seeing clearly. The outpost systems remained silent, as if holding their breath. No alerts, no incoming messages, just the faint sound of movement from Liara's quarters, the closing of a drawer, the shift of weight. She hadn't gone far, just far enough to make her point. Darren didn't move to follow her, didn't try to explain or justify. The defiance settled into his bones, a quiet certainty that felt more like honor than disobedience. He'd defended her autonomy allowed to command, and the words couldn't be taken back. The screen stayed dark, but the path ahead felt suddenly unmistakably clear. Liara emerged from her quarters holding a datapad, her expression stripped of its usual dry humor. She'd analyzed Riven's transmission, dissecting each word for hidden meaning. "Relocate me," she said, placing the pad on the console. "Decommission the outpost." The directive landed with chilling precision, a strategic move rather than emotional reaction. Darren stared at her. "They'll reassign you to some lab. Dissection and analysis. Is that what you want?" "Of course not." Her fingers tapped the screen, pulling up regulations. "But we use their system against them. They want me contained? We give them containment. They want the outpost secured? We secure it permanently." She scrolled through clauses and subclauses, her knowledge of military bureaucracy suddenly apparent. Regulation 14C allows for emergency decommissioning if the facility houses a Class 4 threat. He almost smiled. You're classifying yourself as a threat now? No. Her eyes flicked toward the galley. The toaster. Its quantum fluctuations meet the criteria for unpredictable energy emissions. We file the paperwork, trigger the automatic protocols. They'll send a containment team for the machine, not for me. The audacity of the plan left him momentarily speechless. She'd found a loophole in the very system designed to control her. Using a malfunctioning appliance to redirect military resources, it was either brilliant or insane. They'll separate us, Darren said. The objection felt weak even as he voiced it. They'll send me to another posting. You to who knows where. That's the point. Liara's voice softened slightly. We break the labels. You're not my handler. I'm not your asset. If we stay here, we remain what they say we are. She gestured at the surrounding systems. This place is a cage with your name on the door and mine on the manifest. We need to vanish properly. They spent hours navigating the legal framework. Liara's understanding of military protocols revealed itself layer by layer. She knew which forms required digital signatures versus biometric authentication, which departments operated on delayed response times, which regulations contradicted each other just enough to create bureaucratic limbo. Darren watched her work with reluctant admiration. Her clarity contrasted sharply with his own hesitation. She'd accepted the necessary sacrifice, separation as the price of freedom, while he struggled with the thought of losing what they'd built. The quiet companionship, the shared jokes, the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. They'll court-martial me if this fails, he said, scanning the decommissioning request she'd drafted. They'll do worse to me if we do nothing, she replied. The simple truth hung between them, stripping away his objections. He finally nodded, the movement slow but definite. Okay, we do it your way. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff. They were choosing each other over obedience, loyalty over duty. The outpost's fate shifted from military property to their shared problem to solve. They took a thermos of coffee to the observation deck. The sky hung starless, a solid black sheet that felt both oppressive and private. No orbiting satellites could see them here. No command transmissions could reach them until morning. Liara poured 2 cups, her hands steady. Toaster first, she said, her tone returning to something jijinning their usual banter. Then the environmental systems. We make this place look like it's falling apart from the inside. Darren accepted the cup. The coffee tasted bitter but familiar. They'll be furious when they figure it out. Let them. She sipped her drink, watching the empty sky. Anger is predictable. Predictable is manageable. They sat in silence for a while, passing the thermos between them. The planning felt different now, not rebellion for its own sake, but construction of something new. They were building an exit strategy with the same care they'd once built their fragile coexistence. The outpost hummed below them, its systems waiting for their instructions. Its fate was no longer in the hands of distant commanders, but in theirs. A lieutenant who'd forgotten how to follow orders, and an asset who'd mastered the rules well enough to break them properly. The starless sky offered no guidance, but they didn't need it. They had each other's stubborn loyalty, and for now that was enough. The sterile white walls of Outpost 7 began to change color. Not dramatically, but subtly, taking on the faint blue-green hue of Varley twilight. The transformation started in the hydroponics bay, where glowing plants replaced standard-issue lettuces. Their bioluminescence cast shifting patterns across the ceiling, like underwater shadows dancing. Nearby, the algae tanks developed new behaviors, flocking together to form constellations that hummed unfamiliar melodies. The sound resonated through the ventilation system, a constant low thrum that felt almost like music. The outpost's AI began incorporating Varley words into its responses. It happened gradually at first, a greeting here, a status report there. Soon it was mixing languages with enthusiastic inaccuracy. Atmosphere optimal Kashava. Coffee supply critical Telvar. The mispronunciations grated on Darren's ears but amused Liara to no end. She'd correct the system with exaggerated patience, then laugh when it butchered the corrections. The AI's attempts to speak her language felt like a child trying on adult clothing. Awkward but endearing. Her culture seeped into everything. The lighting cycles shifted to match Varley circadian rhythms, casting the corridors in soft purples and deep blues during rest periods. The environmental controls produced scents Darren couldn't name, sharp mineral tones mixed with something like night-blooming flowers. Even the water recycler developed a distinct rhythm to its processing cycles, pulsing in time with traditional Varley work songs. The systems weren't just functioning, they were learning to live in a new way. Darren responded by adding human touches. He salvaged driftwood from the moon's petrified forest, sanding it smooth to make a countertop for the galley. The grain patterns felt warm under his palms, a contrast to the cool metal surfaces. He pieced together a quilt from discarded uniform patches and insulation lining, the stitches uneven but sturdy. It lay across their shared seating area, a splash of color against the muted tones. His contributions felt rough compared to her technological elegance, but they belonged. Their technologies began merging in unexpected ways. The food synthesizer now produced dishes that blended human and Varley cuisine, nutritionally balanced paste with the texture of bread, coffee with the aromatic complexity of alien spices. The communication systems developed hybrid interfaces, responding equally well to touch and voice commands. Nothing was purely human or entirely Varley anymore. They'd created something new, a third culture born from shared space and necessity. The phrase "the living kind of peace" settled over them. It wasn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of something positive built day by day. Peace lived in the way Darren automatically added extra light to Liara's plants, in how Liara reprogrammed the showers to use water temperature he preferred. It was peace earned through small, consistent acts of consideration. The outpost became a home. Not a military installation, not a prison, but a place that reflected both its inhabitants. They cooked together most evenings, her nutrient paste steaming beside his coffee pot. The ritual felt domestic in a way Darren hadn't experienced since before the war. Liara would occasionally steal a sip of his drink, making a face but never refusing when he offered. The air lost its sterile quality. It smelled of ozone from the systems, yes, but also of the plants they grew and the food they shared. Underneath it all lingered something else, the scent of belonging that had nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with choice. The hum of the algae constellations provided a constant soundtrack to their life together, a melody that felt both alien and familiar. They didn't discuss the change. There were no declarations about creating a home. They simply built it through thousands of small decisions: where to place a chair, how to program a light cycle, when to share silence instead of words. The outpost responded to their care, its systems integrating their preferences until the place felt less like machinery and more like an extension of themselves. The lighting, the sounds, even the air itself told the story of two people who had stopped being soldier and asset and started being something without a proper name. The relay antenna access panel felt colder than usual, the metal biting through their gloves as they worked in the cramped service shaft. Their shoulders brushed with each adjustment, a constant physical reminder of their shared confinement in the narrow space. Darren focused on rerouting fried circuits while Liara calibrated the signal amplifiers, their movements practiced and synchronized from months of such repairs. The only sounds were the click of tools and their own breathing in the enclosed space. She spoke without looking up from her work, her voice barely carrying over the hum of electronics. "Now I want to stay." The words hung in the air between them, simple and unexpected. Darren's hand stilled on the wiring harness. He waited, expecting qualification or explanation. None came. After a moment, she continued, her attention still on the delicate calibration. "Because here I'm not a prisoner and you're not a soldier." The statement landed with quiet finality, redefining everything they'd built together. Darren's response came out flat, almost resigned. "Yeah, that's what I was afraid of." The admission acknowledged his own unspoken shift, the gradual transformation he'd been denying even to himself. Fear hadn't been about Command's wrath or court-martial. The real fear had been this, caring enough to want this impossible arrangement to continue. Freedom wasn't about escape anymore, not about returning to ruined homeworlds or military postings. It became the right to maintain what they'd created, this fragile, imperfect space where they could simply be people rather than labels. The antenna repair felt suddenly symbolic, their hands working together to maintain a connection to a universe that wanted to separate them. Their partnership evolved in the cramped space. The tactical cooperation of handler and asset gave way to something more personal. The vulnerability felt physical, a tangible shift in the air between them. They weren't just two people performing tasks side by side. They were two people choosing each other despite every logical reason not to. The relay beeped twice, signaling successful recalibration. The sound cut through the tension, a sharp electronic confirmation that their work was complete. It felt like a seal on something larger than antenna repairs, a vow made with tools in hand and truths hanging in the air. They didn't touch, didn't embrace or even look directly at each other. The space between their shoulders in that narrow shaft held more weight than any physical contact could have. Their choice had been made not with dramatic declarations, but with quiet admissions in a service corridor. Backing out of the access panel felt like emerging from a confessional. The main corridor seemed brighter, the air less charged. They stood for a moment, tools dangling from their hands, looking at each other properly for the first time since her confession. The outpost's lights dimmed automatically, responding to the completed repair cycle and the shift to evening hours. The soft transition felt deliberate, like the station itself was giving them privacy for this moment. Their faces were half in shadow, the usual sharp edges softened by the low light. They walked back to the control room in silence, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The usual banter didn't come. There was no need for sarcasm or deflection. The truth sat between them, acknowledged and accepted. The systems monitor showed the relay functioning perfectly, its signal strong and clear. Darren watched the readings scroll across the screen without really seeing them. Liara stood beside him, her arms crossed, studying the same data. They'd fixed the antenna, but they'd also fixed something between themselves, a connection that felt more vital than any communication link. The outpost settled into its evening rhythm around them, the familiar hum of systems providing a constant backdrop to their silence. They didn't need to discuss what came next. The decision had been made in that cramped service shaft, sealed with a beep and acknowledged in the dimming light. They'd chosen each other, and for now that was enough. The ground near the hydroponics dome yielded slowly to the shovel, each thrust meeting the moon's compacted soil with stubborn resistance. Darren worked methodically, his movements economical and practiced. The hole took shape gradually, a dark mouth opening in the gray dust. Liara stood watching, her arms crossed, her expression giving nothing away. The war beacon lay between them on a tarp, its metallic surface scarred and pitted from some forgotten conflict. Its signal lights had gone dark years ago, but the potential for reactivation remained, a sleeping threat neither wanted to resurrect. They'd found it during routine perimeter checks, half buried near the communications array. Its design marked it as standard military issue from the war's middle years, capable of summoning reinforcements or signaling surrender depending on the encryption used. Darren had initially considered salvaging its components. The power core alone could run their systems for months. But Liara's stillness when she saw it told him this wasn't salvage, it was a ghost. The beacon represented everything they'd left behind. Battlefield communications that often meant death announcements, loss markers that signaled another soldier wouldn't be coming home, separation orders that tore apart units and families. Its very existence contradicted the life they were building here, where communication meant shared laughter over malfunctioning appliances and separation meant different corners of the same home. Darren finished digging. The hole stood about a meter deep, its edges clean and precise. He leaned the shovel against the dome's exterior and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. Moon dust streaked across his skin, leaving gray traces that wouldn't brush away. Liara approached then, her movements deliberate. She took one end of the tarp, he took the other. Together they lifted the beacon, its weight familiar and unpleasant, the heft of military technology designed for destruction. They lowered it into the hole without speaking. The metal settled into the soil with a finality that felt louder than words. This wasn't a ceremony with recited phrases or symbolic gestures. There were no vows exchanged, no promises made aloud. Their joint effort became the language itself, the sharing of weight, the synchronized movement, the mutual decision to consign this piece of their past to permanent silence. The soil accepted the metal without protest. Darren began filling the hole, each shovelful landing with a soft thump that seemed to absorb sound rather than create it. Liara watched the beacon disappear under the gray blanket, her gaze fixed on the disappearing contours. When the hole was nearly full, she reached down and pressed one hand against the freshly turned earth, leaving a faint imprint of her fingers against the soil. They stood over the filled patch when it was done. Their hands were stained with moon dust. the fine powder working its way under their nails and into the lines of their palms. The beacon rested below them now, its signals silenced, its purpose nullified by their simple act of burial. The hydroponics dome hummed softly beside them, its plants unaware of the ritual that had taken place at their roots. The outpost's sensors recorded the location automatically, standard procedure for any subsurface disturbance. The coordinates flashed briefly on the maintenance log, a routine entry among dozens of others. Then, following programming Darren had quietly implemented weeks earlier, the system purged the record. The deletion wasn't dramatic, just a soft chime and the quiet shift of data being consigned to oblivion. They walked back inside wordlessly, the airlock cycling closed behind them. There would be no marker, no notation in any log, no way for anyone to ever find that buried piece of their history. The act felt simultaneously insignificant and monumental, a quiet rebellion against the past that required no speeches or declarations. Their stained hands would wash clean, but the memory of what they'd buried together would remain, a silent promise sealed in moon soil. The toaster began producing alien sweets, not instead of toast but alongside it, small pulsing purple confections that smelled like ozone and honey. Liara would find them waiting beside her morning nutrient paste, still warm from the heating elements. She never admitted to enjoying them, but they disappeared quickly enough. The machine had learned her preferences through observation, its programming adapting to include treats from a world it had never seen. The outpost's AI developed opinions on their relationship. It started offering unsolicited advice during routine maintenance checks. Atmospheric harmony suggests increased proximity would benefit both parties, it announced one evening while Darren was cleaning filters. Liara rolled her eyes, but Darren noticed she didn't disable the commentary function. The observations grew increasingly specific. Your heart rate synchronized during joint repairs, the AI noted during a systems diagnostic. Statistically significant correlation. The accuracy was annoying, but neither of them changed the settings. At night, the algae tanks began projecting constellations onto the ceiling. Not human patterns or Varley navigation charts, but something new. Hybrid formations that told stories neither culture recognized alone. The light patterns shifted slowly, tracing narratives about lost travelers finding common ground. Liara would sometimes translate the Varley elements quietly, her voice soft in the darkened room. Darren added human interpretations where he could, their stories weaving together under the artificial stars. Their tools developed preferences. Darren's wrenches recalibrated their grip settings to match Liara's hand size, the handles adjusting automatically when she picked them up. Her interfaces began recognizing his gestures, responding to the particular way he waved a hand to clear screens or tilted his head to pause displays. The technology wasn't sentient, but it had become responsive in ways that felt personal. The systems learned their rhythms, when they worked best alone, when they collaborated, when they needed space. The station transformed into a third entity celebrating their union. It reflected their care back at them through 1,000 small adaptations. The showers now played music that blended human guitar riffs with Varley rhythmic patterns, creating something entirely new that made them both laugh. The recycler hummed a tune they'd heard the algae constellations sing the night before. Even the lighting cycles developed emotional intelligence, brightening when they were working, softening when they sat together in the evenings. Their inside jokes became embedded in the systems. When Darren complained about the AI's relationship advice, Liara programmed it to use his mother's voice for maintenance reminders. He retaliated by making the food synthesizer announce her nutrient paste with dramatic fanfare. The back and forth felt less like pranks and more like a conversation conducted through technology. The station became their shared language, its quirks and adaptations reinforcing the world they'd built together. They stopped seeing the systems as separate from themselves. The outpost had become an extension of their partnership, its functions woven into the fabric of their daily lives. When the environmental controls adjusted to keep Liara comfortable, it felt like the station itself cared for her. When the tools adapted to Darren's preferences, it seemed like the technology respected his methods. The line between users and systems blurred until they all functioned as a single organism. The final test came when Command ran a remote diagnostic. The systems reported optimal functionality, while simultaneously hiding all the adaptations they'd made. The toaster showed standard bread toasting patterns. The AI demonstrated perfect military protocol. The environmental controls reported regulation settings. Everything appeared perfectly normal, completely by the book, utterly conventional. The diagnostic completed without flags. When the transmission ended, the station immediately reverted to its actual configurations. The toaster produced one perfect purple confection. The algae constellations reappeared on the ceiling. The AI said, "Deception successful. Would you like relationship advice to celebrate?" They didn't answer, just shared a look that said everything necessary. The technology had become their collaborator, their co-conspirator, their witness. It wasn't alive, but it had learned to reflect life back at them, their life together. The systems hummed contentedly around them, a chorus of approval for the choices they'd made. The outpost felt less like a place and more like a participant in whatever they were becoming. The transmission alert cut through the evening's quiet like a blade. No polite chime or scheduled update. This was the sharp, repetitive tone reserved for priority commands. The screen flickered to life without waiting for acknowledgement, displaying the stark white text of a military directive against a black background. No video, no voice, just words in unforgiving official font. Outpost 7, prepare for extraction, departure in 48 hours. The message hung there, bureaucratic and final. No request. No options, just compliance expected. Darren stared at the words, his coffee cooling beside him. The steam rising from the cup seemed frivolous now. Liara stood by the viewport, her back to the screen, but he saw her shoulders tighten. She didn't need to read it. The tone said everything. Extraction. The word meant separation. Him to another posting, probably some frontier hellhole. Her to reassignment, which could mean anything from laboratory study to permanent containment. The military didn't leave loose ends, especially not sentient ones. Their home, the place they'd built from sterile walls and shared silence, faced dismantling by hands that had never cared for it. Strangers would pack up his handmade quilt, would shut down her bioluminescent plants, would misunderstand the toaster's quirks. They'd catalog everything without seeing what any of it meant. The outpost would become data on a form. A checklist completed, another facility closed. The life they'd created would be reduced to inventory and incident reports. Darren looked at Liara. She turned from the viewport, her eyes meeting his. No panic showed in her expression, no despair. Just assessment, calculation. The same look she'd given malfunctioning systems and tactical problems. Their months of collaboration had forged something stronger than fear. A cold, clear determination to protect what was theirs. "We make the outpost disappear," he said. The words came out flat, a statement of fact rather than a suggestion. Liara's mouth curved slightly, not a smile, but something sharper. "The cloaking net," she said. "You handle that. I'll recalibrate the energy signatures." Their humor returned, but weaponized now. Darren nodded. "I'll get the net. You bribe the algae." The joke landed perfectly. A reference to the living systems that had become their allies. The algae owed them favors for extra light cycles. The toaster owed them for not being scrapped. The entire station had become a network of quiet collaborations they could now call upon. The transmission screen went dark, its message delivered and ignored. The countdown had begun. 48 hours until military transports would arrive expecting order and obedience. But Darren and Liara were already moving. The directive had shifted from a threat to a deadline. They had 2 days to vanish an entire outpost, and they'd use every minute. Darren went to the storage bay where the cloaking equipment gathered dust. The military had issued it for emergency concealment from enemy scans, not for hiding from command itself. The irony felt appropriate. He ran a systems check, the panels lighting up under his hands. The net would mask their energy output, make them look like background radiation or debris. It wouldn't hold up to close inspection, but it might buy time. Liara went to the algae tanks. She didn't speak, just placed her hands against the glass. The organisms reacted immediately, swirling into complex patterns that shimmered under the lights. They communicated through light and chemical signals, a language she'd learned through patience and observation. Now she asked for their help in deceiving scanners, in masking life signs, in becoming something other than what they were. The algae responded with pulses of agreement. They would scatter their formations to mimic random particle noise, would absorb excess heat, would play dead for bureaucratic eyes. The outpost hummed around them, its systems sensing the shift in purpose. The AI remained silent for once, perhaps understanding that some moments required action rather than commentary. They worked without speaking, their movements coordinated from months of practice. There was no need for discussion. Each knew their role. Each trusted the other to execute it. The threat of separation had become the catalyst for permanent union. They wouldn't be taken apart by distant commanders. They would vanish together, their home becoming a ghost in the system. The transmission had ended, but their defiance was just beginning. Darren recalibrated the cloaking net with practiced movements, his fingers dancing across the control panel. The system hummed as it expanded, weaving an energy blanket around the outpost that would mask their thermal and electronic signatures. He adjusted the frequency to mimic background radiation patterns, making them look like just another cold rock floating in the void. The net shimmered briefly at the edges of the viewports, then settled into invisibility. It was designed to hide from enemy scanners, but today it would hide from friends, or what passed for friends in the military bureaucracy. Liara approached the algae tanks, her palms pressed against the cool glass. The organisms swirled in response, their bioluminescence pulsing in complex patterns. She communicated through light and temperature shifts, offering extra energy cycles in exchange for their cooperation. The algae agreed, their formations shifting to scatter sensor readings in unpredictable ways. They would absorb excess heat, mask life signs, and generally make the outpost appear as uninteresting space debris to any passing scans. The negotiation took less than 3 minutes. The algae had become willing accomplices in their disappearance. They moved to the communication systems next, rewiring the transmitters to mimic the random signal scatter of derelict spacecraft. Darren handled the hardware modifications while Liara reprogrammed the software. Their movements were synchronized from months of working side by side. He passed her tools before she asked. She adjusted code to compensate for his physical changes. The systems began broadcasting false debris patterns, creating the electronic ghost of a station that had broken apart years ago. Any orbital scan would see shattered components drifting harmlessly, not a functioning outpost. The toaster received its assignment last. Liara fed it a special program that generated false logistics reports. It began printing documents on edible paper, inventory lists showing depleted supplies, maintenance reports indicating system failures, personnel files suggesting abandonment. The machine produced these with its usual efficiency, the warm smell of toasted bread oddly comforting amidst the deception. The reports would confuse Command's AI, creating bureaucratic noise that might delay any investigation. A toaster becoming their misinformation center felt perfectly appropriate given their history. Their home transformed into a ghost before their eyes. The lights dimmed to emergency levels, the systems quieted to standby hums, the viewports polarized to near opacity. What had been a vibrant living space now appeared derelict and abandoned to any external observation, but inside the heart of the outpost beat stronger than ever. The algae still glowed softly, the air still carried the scent of their shared meals. The quiet understanding between them remained unbroken. They worked without speaking, their efficiency born from countless hours of practice and hard-won trust. Darren would point to a control panel and Liara would already be adjusting it. She would gesture toward a wiring conduit, and he would have the appropriate tool ready. Their partnership had evolved beyond words into something more fundamental, a shared rhythm that needed no verbal coordination. The silence between them felt comfortable, filled with the certainty of mutual purpose. The plan stopped feeling like rebellion about halfway through. The tension in Darren's shoulders eased as he realized this wasn't about defying authority anymore. It was about protection, about safeguarding the fragile world they'd built together against forces that would never understand its value. Each system they masked, each signature they concealed, felt less like deception and more like preservation. They weren't hiding from command. They were protecting their home. The final scan from orbit passed over them without pause. The sensors detected only what they'd designed them to see: debris patterns, radioactive decay, the cold silence of abandoned technology. The outpost had vanished from military monitors, erased from official existence, but inside, the algae constellation still glowed on the ceilings. The toaster still produced perfect toast, and 2 people stood together watching the empty scan results scroll by. The station had become invisible to the universe, but to each other they had never been more present. The systems hummed softly around them, a quiet affirmation that their disappearance was complete. The roof of Outpost 7 offered a view of nothing. The cloaking net turned the stars into faint smudges, the blackness of space into something almost solid. Darren and Liara sat with a thermos between them, its contents steaming faintly in the chill air. The silence felt different up here, wider but less empty. They'd escaped Command's notice, but the victory felt quiet, personal. Darren broke the stillness first. "You were the weirdest gift I've ever received." The words came out flat, but his mouth curved at the edges. He didn't look at her, just watched the blurred stars. Liara took the thermos, her fingers brushing his. "You were the worst reward I've ever been forced to tolerate." Her tone matched his, dry, undercut by the slight smile she couldn't suppress. The insults hung between them, their true meaning clear in the way their shoulders nearly touched. Their smiles undermined the words completely. What had begun as a military transaction had become something neither could have predicted. The labels didn't fit anymore. Handler and asset, soldier and prize. Those terms belonged to the people they'd been before shared repairs and buried beacons and a toaster that printed star charts. They redefined family in that moment, though neither said the word aloud. It wasn't about biology or duty or shared genetics. It was about choice. The conscious decision to protect each other, to build together, to stay when leaving would have been easier. The vastness of space stretched around them, but they'd created a center right here, a fixed point that mattered more than any stellar coordinate. Their old identities dissolved like smoke. Darren wasn't a soldier following orders anymore. Liara wasn't an asset waiting reassignment. They were something without a proper name, something the military had no forms to categorize. The recognition passed between them without needing verification. They knew what they were to each other, and that was enough. The silence felt comfortable now. Charged not with tension but with possibility. Unspoken futures hung in the air between them. Expansions to the hydroponics garden, maybe even visitors someday. Certainly more repairs and adaptations and quiet evenings watching alien algae form constellations on the ceiling. The threats hadn't vanished, but they'd become manageable. Something to handle together rather than fear separately. The stars blinked behind the cloaking field, their light distorted but persistent. They'd seen empires rise and fall, wars begin and end, countless lives flicker into existence and vanish. Their indifference to one small outpost and its 2 inhabitants felt strangely comforting. The universe would continue regardless of what they built here, but that made their choices more meaningful, not less. They passed the thermos back and forth, the warmth seeping through their gloves. The coffee tasted like all their shared mornings, slightly bitter, familiar, infused with the memory of countless small moments that had led them here. The roof felt like neutral territory, a space outside their daily routines where they could acknowledge what they'd become. The cloaking net hummed softly, its energy field wrapping the outpost in protective silence. To anyone watching from outside, they were invisible, gone, but to each other they had never been more present. The military's paperwork would list them as decommissioned, but they were more active than ever. More alive. They sat until the thermos emptied and the air grew colder. The conversation hadn't resolved anything, but it hadn't needed to. Some understandings didn't require lengthy discussion. They packed up slowly, their movements synchronized from habit. The descent back into the outpost felt like returning to a shared home, rather than a military installation. The stars continued their indifferent blinking as the roof access door sealed shut. Their small, brave happiness went unrecorded by any official monitoring system, but it burned steadily in the quiet darkness. A light that owed nothing to duty or regulation and everything to choice. The outpost systems achieved full integration, their functions blending like voices in a choir that had finally found harmony. The AI now spoke a hybrid language that scolded them both with equal fervor. Life signs detected in maintenance corridor during sleep cycle, it announced one morning. This violates optimal rest protocols, Kashava. Also, the toaster requires cleaning, Telvar. The machine had developed a tone that managed to sound both exasperated and fond, like a parent tolerating creative children. Command's final scan passed over them during the night. The sensors swept across their sector, searching for the energy signature that should have marked Outpost 7's position. The readouts showed only empty space and background radiation, exactly what Darren and Liara had designed them to see. The military systems registered no life signs, no technology, no evidence that anyone had ever lived here. The scan completed its search pattern and moved on, its programming satisfied that nothing of value remained in this sector. They had vanished not into darkness, but into their own careful design. The cloaking net hummed softly, its energy field mimicking the cold silence of dead space. The communication arrays broadcast false debris patterns. The environmental controls leaked just enough heat to match asteroid radiation. Every system played its part in the deception, creating the perfect electronic ghost story for anyone watching from afar. Inside, life continued with quiet rhythm. The algae tanks sang Varley lullabies after dark, their bioluminescent patterns tracing ancient melodies across the ceiling. The toaster produced perfect golden bread every morning, its rebellious phase replaced by reliable service. The food synthesizer blended human and Varley cuisine into dishes that smelled like home, whatever that meant now. Darren and Liara shared their morning meal at the galley counter, their routines so seamless they rarely needed words. He poured coffee while she arranged nutrient paste beside toasted bread. Their glances held familiar warmth, the kind that comes from surviving something together and finding you prefer the company afterward. They moved through the space with unconscious coordination, passing utensils without looking, anticipating needs without asking. The station felt alive in ways that defied its programming. The air circulation adjusted before they felt stuffy. The lighting shifted based on their moods rather than schedules. The systems responded to unspoken cues, creating an environment that felt less like machinery and more like an extension of their care. They hadn't just hidden from the universe, they had transformed their small corner of it into something entirely new. The threat of extraction faded like a bad signal. No more transmission alerts cut through their evenings. No more bureaucratic demands interrupted their work. The silence from command felt like approval, though they knew it meant only that their deception held. The military had bigger concerns than one missing outpost and two souls who preferred each other's company to following orders. Their home became their fortress through simple daily choices. The reinforced doors stayed unlocked between their quarters. The security systems recognized only their biometrics. The viewports remained polarized against outside observation but clear from within. They had built a sanctuary not with weapons or barriers, but with shared intention and stubborn loyalty. The story of Outpost 7 ended in official records as decommissioned due to systemic failure. But below that cold notation, beneath the false sensor readings and bureaucratic paperwork, something remarkable continued. Two people from opposite sides of a war had created a world that needed no armies, no handlers, no assets. Just quiet mornings with good coffee and the certain knowledge that they had chosen each other over everything else. The systems hummed contentedly around them, a constant reminder that they had succeeded. Not in hiding, but in building. Not in escaping, but in arriving somewhere worth protecting. Their home stood invisible to the universe, but radiantly present to themselves. A testament to what could happen when people stopped being what others called them, and started being who they chose to become. The hydroponics bay smelled of damp soil and alien blossoms, a scent that had become as familiar as coffee. Darren traced the leaves of a bioluminescent plant, its blue glow warming his fingers. "We could expand this section," he said. "Double the growing space. Maybe even set up a proper guest quarters." The suggestion hung in the air, tentative but real. Visitors meant trust. It meant believing their fragile peace could include others. Liara watched him from across the bay, her head tilted. "Your species has a word for permanent loyalty bonds," she said. "But I'm not sure the concept translates." Her fingers brushed a flowering vine that curled toward her touch. "Varley loyalty isn't chosen. It's recognized. Like finding a star's gravitational pull." Darren didn't try to explain human marriage ceremonies or friendship vows. He'd learned enough to know some concepts resist translation. "I don't need to understand it," he said. "I just need to respect that it's yours." The admission felt simpler than trying to force their experiences into shared categories. Their connection didn't require mutual comprehension, only mutual acceptance. Their love became a practical thing, built not on grand gestures but on daily choices. It lived in the way they divided repair tasks without discussion, in the sarcastic comments they traded over malfunctioning systems, in the quiet companionship of shared meals. They'd earned this peace through labor and loss, through burned toast and buried beacons and 1,000 small moments of choosing each other. They didn't kiss, didn't embrace. Their romance happened in the maintenance ducts, hands passing tools as they fixed life support. It flourished in the galley, debating the merits of nutrient paste versus coffee. It grew in the careful space between their quarters where the door stayed open, but privacy remained respected. Physical contact came through brushed shoulders during repairs, through handing over a warm drink, through simultaneous reach for the same wrench. These moments held more meaning than any dramatic declaration could. The universe felt smaller from their cloaked outpost. The war, the politics, the countless star systems, all of it seemed distant and vaguely irrelevant. But their world felt infinite. The hydroponics bay became a universe of growing things. The repair schedules turned into epic sagas of problem-solving. The quiet evenings watching algae constellations felt like exploring new galaxies. They hadn't shrunk their lives by going into hiding. They'd expanded them by focusing on what actually mattered. They shed their old labels like outdated equipment. Soldier and asset belonged to different people in a different time. Enemy and prisoner were terms for a war that felt like someone else's story. What remained defied easy categorization, partners but more than that. Companions but deeper. They were what happened when two people from opposite sides decided to build instead of destroy. Every morning brought new definitions. Some days they were co-conspirators, tweaking systems to better hide their presence. Other days they became gardeners, nurturing strange plants from two different worlds. Sometimes they were just two people sharing silence over breakfast, their familiarity more comfortable than any label could capture. The outpost's systems reflected their undefined relationship. The AI used mixed languages without favoring either. The environmental controls balanced human and Varley preferences without compromising either. The technology had learned to exist in the space between their cultures just as they had. It didn't need names for what they were. It just adapted to serve what they needed. Their relationship challenged every assumption about connection across species. It wasn't about overcoming differences through force of will or finding some magical common ground. It was about building something new in the space between their experiences. Something that contained elements of both but belonged entirely to neither. They weren't bridging a gap. They were making the gap irrelevant. The hydroponics bay hummed around them, the plants growing in mixed arrangements that would baffle any botanist from either species. Darren's hand rested on a terrestrial tomato plant. Liara's fingers traced a Varley light vine. Their separate actions felt connected, part of the same purpose. They were cultivating more than plants, they were growing a future that had no name but felt like home. Command's database updated without fanfare. Outpost 7's status shifted from active to decommissioned in a routine system sweep. The file closed automatically. Another administrative task completed. Some junior officer probably approved the change without reading the details. The galaxy moved on to newer conflicts, fresher concerns. Nobody wondered what happened to one small outpost and its 2 inhabitants. The bureaucracy had processed them out of existence, and that suited everyone just fine. Meanwhile, the outpost continued its silent orbit. Inside, Darren and Liara worked on expanding the hydroponics bay, their movements synchronized from months of practice. They didn't celebrate their official non-existence, didn't mark the occasion. They simply added another grow bed for terrestrial vegetables alongside Varley light vines. Their victory wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet satisfaction of systems functioning, plants growing, and peace enduring. Their bond became the moral center of a home that defied all categorization. Not a military installation, not a prison, not even a proper colony, just a place where two people had decided to stop being what others called them and start being who they chose to become. The space held no flags, no insignia, no declarations of ownership. Only the evidence of care, polished tools, thriving plants, and the comfortable silence of mutual understanding. There was no ceremony to mark their permanence. No vows exchanged, no documents signed, just the daily choice to heal together instead of apart. Darren would wake to find Liara had already started the coffee. Liara would find her tools sharpened and calibrated. These small acts built something more durable than any formal agreement could. Their commitment lived in actions, not words. The war's shadow receded slowly, like a bad signal fading from a scanner. It never vanished completely. Some ghosts refused to be fully banished, but it lost its power to define them. The darkness was replaced by the soft glow of bioluminescent plants, the warmth of shared meals, the sound of laughter echoing through corridors that had once felt sterile and lonely. The past remained, but it no longer dictated the present. They'd outmaneuvered a massive bureaucracy using nothing but cunning and care. No weapons, no threats, no grand gestures, just a deep understanding of systems and how to make them work against themselves. The military had expected resistance or submission. They'd never anticipated someone would simply opt out of their entire game. The victory felt clean, like a well-executed repair that leaves no trace of the original problem. Their triumph wasn't the explosive kind that makes for good stories. It was the durable sort built like reinforced polymer. Layers of trust and practicality fused into something that could withstand pressure without breaking. It was the kind of victory that goes unnoticed because it doesn't make noise or demand attention. It simply endures. One evening, watching the algae constellations form on the ceiling, Liara said the word quietly. Sing. It wasn't a request or command, just an observation that the station's systems had developed their own music. Lately, a blend of human melodies and Varley, harmonics that neither had programmed. The outpost responded, as if waiting for the cue. The algae brightened their patterns. The ventilation system hummed in a new key. The distant thrum of the recycling processors shifted to a harmonic frequency. The entire station seemed to breathe in and find its voice. A quiet, complex melody that filled the space without overwhelming it. The sound wasn't perfect. It had rough edges and unexpected transitions. But it was theirs. They sat together in the growing dark, listening to their home sing them into the night. The melody wove through the corridors, comforting and strange, familiar and new. It was the sound of systems integrating, of cultures blending, of two people choosing each other day after day. The song had no words, but it told their entire story. And somewhere in the quiet between notes, they found the peace they'd been fighting for all along. Their journey proves that coercion can unexpectedly forge bonds stronger than duty. A battlefield prize became family through quiet acts of shared repair and stubborn loyalty. True heroism isn't about following orders but choosing who deserves protection. Their outpost transformed from sterile assignment to living home. Not through rebellion but through daily choices to see each other's humanity. So consider this. What world would you build if given the chance? What labels would you discard? Their story suggests we find ourselves not in grand battles but in small, consistent acts of care for those beside us.